right, welcome into Surviving Paradise, the podcast that takes a sometimes serious, oftentimes humorous look at the claim by Jehovah's Witnesses that they are living in a modern-day spiritual paradise. I am your host, Stacy Bauman, former elder, ministerial servant, and a kid raised as one of Jehovah's Witnesses in the 1970s and 1980s. Just a quick warning, we try to have fun here. There's lots of healing, sarcasm, humor, never meant to offend. Welcome in this week. I want to start off by sharing a quick programming note. This crazy little show will take a small break to enjoy some vacation time, and I plan on returning at the very beginning of 2025. May sneak an episode over the next couple weeks, I'm just not sure, so just in case, thought I would share. If not, I will be back at the beginning of 2025. Frankly, I think it's very important to step away from all things Jehovah's Witnesses every now and then. It's good for our emotional and mental health. Frankly, the absurdity of it all can grind you down. And I have to admit that lately I've felt that a bit. So I'm going to take a deep breath. I'm going to stare at some trees, some waterfalls and stuff, and not wonder about the future genderless generals of Jesus' genocidal army. I think I'm just going to take a quick few-day break. So please note that. I hope you're all going to enjoy some time away and join me again as we start the new year in 2025. I find myself wondering what new doctrine or kingly appointment the governing body will news dump on the universe when we are all distracted and away enjoying the very pagan holidays. Maybe the 11 kings in upstate New York will give us permission to touch our own bodies the way we want, or look the other way if we get our kids' names tattooed somewhere on our own flesh. Your guess is as good as mine, but I'm sure they'll sneak some new light in over the next few weeks. It's the perfect time to sneak in a new doctrine when nobody's looking. I really want to take a few seconds and just thank each and every person that takes the time to listen to this crazy show. And a huge, huge thank you for all the notes and the social media DMs. If I missed yours, please accept my apologies. I'm so bad at it, and I don't spend a lot of time there. I'm trying to follow David Splain's wise counsel on social media, the same way I followed the guys before him when they told me not to listen to music, go to concert, or play sports. I did all of it. I didn't listen, and you shouldn't either. But as we close out year 110 of the last days that never seem to end, the governing body is treating Jehovah's Witnesses and potential converts to the December 2024 JW broadcast, hosted by Writing Committee helper Hermanus Van Helm. Instantly, I identified where much of the out-of-date writing style and juvenile counsel might be coming from in the publications. Taking one look at Hermanus, he's an older fella. He looks like he might be in his late 60s or maybe early 70s, just a guess. And I'm sure he relates very well to today's Gen Z Jehovah's Witness, right? The young people. They undoubtedly follow him on his Instagram page. I'm sure his takes on dating, dress and grooming, friendship, and higher education have found their way into the publications and videos. Very, very relatable for a teenager today inside Jehovah's Witnesses. But Brother Van Helm is our host for a look back at the October 2024 annual meeting of Jehovah's Witnesses. They are now, at this point, featuring the full-length, fully edited, oh yeah, there's edits, meeting for all of Jehovah's Witnesses to watch and listen. I covered this in October, but I want to start talking and highlight some of the leftovers, some of the things that we can now focus in a little bit on. There was a couple of highlights that jumped out at me. He begins the meeting by saying that this is the 140th annual meeting. I had to pause for a second. As I watched, I couldn't help but wonder if there was at least just one thinking Jehovah's Witness out there that did some quick math in their head when he said this was the 140th annual meeting of Jehovah's Witnesses. This means the first annual meeting happened in 1884, a full 30 years before Jesus took his throne in heaven, sent Satan to the kids' room here on earth and informed his human leadership team to announce that anyone alive in 1914 would be eyewitnesses to the bloodiest war in universal history. Most of us, probably almost all of us listening in, thanks again, grew up banking on this promise from Jesus and his earthly representatives. You remember, from the Watchtower of March 1st, 1961, page 132, we were told, quote, "This generation that is still alive from AD 1914 is the generation Jesus said would see all things occur, including this world's end. Deliverance for Jesus' true followers into God's new world is due within this generation." End quote. So when Brother Van Helm kicks off this episode of JW Broadcasting by proudly announcing, lots of pride, that this is the 140th annual meeting in Jehovah's Witness history, it made me wonder, at least in that moment, what they had to talk about for 30 years at the lead up to this big 1914 event that took place in heaven. What were they talking about? It doesn't take much to find out, because I went and looked. In a conversation we can only assume was confusing, Jesus, as is believed by Jehovah's Witnesses today, Jesus told Chuck Taze Russell to tell the rest of us that he, Jesus Christ, had returned invisibly in October 1874, and that he had been ruling from heaven since that date. It's all in print. Not 1914, 1874. What a confusing conversation. Still, apparently no need for an annual meeting for another 10 years. But during this time, Chuck Russell believed that the Great Pyramid of Giza was built by the Hebrews, and the Brooklyn Daily Eagle there in New York reported that Russell was accused of gaining profit by selling something called miracle wheat. Jesus' personal choice to kick off the modern era of Jehovah's Witnesses during the last days was advertising miracle wheat for $60 per bushel in the Watchtower. Did you know that the Watchtower used to have ads? It did. Far above the average cost of wheat at that time, I might add. Just a few highlights for those that may want to know. When you mention this sort of stuff, it's interesting to find out exactly what was going on 140 annual meetings ago. But aside from that quick thought during Brother Van Helm's opening remarks, before he highlights the 140th annual meeting, I also wondered if any Jehovah's Witness in 2024 was put off by the fact that they've had this many annual meetings. 140? 140 years, huh? Huh? Doesn't anyone pause and think about this? This would be multiple generations of Jehovah's Witnesses. So much we could say we're familiar with it. But alas, back to Brother Van Helm's review of the annual meeting number 140. Granted, I know at this point, as a disclaimer or just to hone in for a minute, I know that I reviewed this meeting back in October. You can watch that episode. But I am here again to see the spin that the governing body puts on this when presenting it to the entire congregation of Jehovah's Witnesses via video. Not everyone had access in October. This is them in what they call part one of the annual meeting, talking directly to the brethren, all Jehovah's Witnesses. So full confession, I'm not sure how much of this I covered over a month ago, but there really are some additional highlights that are worth commenting on, at least from my perspective. In addition, they're calling this part one, as I mentioned, and I'm very, very curious to see how many Jehovah's Witnesses actually watch and listen. And if anything said, at least the high points I grabbed onto, wakes any of them up, gets them to think a little bit. You might remember the opening remarks are from newly appointed king priest Gage Flegel. He goes on to say that Jehovah is directing his people in many different ways and says that the most significant event of the past year was that, quote, we have welcomed back thousands who have been removed from the congregation. And certainly there has been great joy in heaven, but here on earth as well. We are delighted to have these dear ones back with us again. Wouldn't you agree? End quote. And then he leads those in attendance in clapping. They all start clapping. Never mind that he said thousands have returned. It's uncorroborated. There is no information to support this comment, but it certainly plays well with what they're telling governments now about their shunning policy, right? He said thousands have returned, and then he looks awkwardly into the camera, and I guess at the audience, if they're actually there, it looks really edited and cheesy. He starts clapping. And as a former elder, this seemingly innocuous reaction at the annual meeting got my attention, so I'm calling it out. You see, when I was an elder, and I'm ashamed to admit here that I made many disfellowshipping and reinstatement announcements. You remember, if you're an elder, it always came at the end of the night after the service meeting in our congregation. Someone said, Brother Bauman is going to make an announcement. You could hear a pin drop in the Kingdom Hall as you walked up the aisle, got on stage, and told someone that they are no longer a Jehovah's Witness. I'm ashamed to admit that I did that. But more importantly, when we made a reinstatement announcement, we were not allowed to clap, leading to what really was an awkward silence that was anything but warm and fuzzy. It was very awkward as people turn and look at the person who suddenly they can talk to again. But now the Jehovah's Witnesses are clapping when thousands come back. Gage Flegel led them in clapping. Remember this one? From the Kingdom Ministry of February 2000, page 7, question box. Is it appropriate to applaud when a reinstatement is announced? Is the heading. Here's their counsel. Quote, in his loving kindness, Jehovah God has provided a scriptural way for repentant wrongdoers to regain his favor and achieve reinstatement in the Christian congregation. When this takes place, we are encouraged to confirm our love for such sincerely repentant ones. Even so, as joyful as we are when a relative or acquaintance is reinstated, a quiet dignity should prevail at the time that the person's reinstatement is announced in the congregation. The Watchtower of October 1st, 1998, page 17, notice they didn't reference the Bible, but the Watchtower expressed matters this way. We must remember, however, that most in the congregation are not aware of the particular circumstances that led to a person's expulsion or to his reinstatement. In addition, there may be some who have been personally affected or hurt, perhaps even on a long-term basis, by the wrongdoing of the repentant one. Being sensitive to such matters, therefore, when an announcement of reinstatement is made, we would understandably withhold expressions of welcome until such can be made on a personal basis. Although we are very happy to see someone return to the truth, applause at the time of his or her reinstatement would not be appropriate. End quote. This was the counsel that I grew up on as an elder, so it really, really jumped out at me when governing body member and future king priest Gage Flegel led everyone in clapping when he claims thousands have come running back to the organization in this last year. But then there's this. From the May 2016, you'll notice 16-year gap here, the Watchtower of that month, May, question from the readers, page 32, had this to say, quote, when someone is reinstated in the congregation, we have good reason to rejoice. The person will have to keep on maintaining his integrity to God, but he had to be repentant in order to be reinstated. And we are glad that he repented. Accordingly, there may well be spontaneous, dignified applause when the elders make an announcement of reinstatement. End quote. Just 16 years later, it became okay to clap for people being reinstated. And in this annual meeting recap, we see Gage taking the lead in getting the audience to join him in clapping, hardly spontaneous, as he wrote in the May Watchtower of 2016, but he does it. And why am I harping on such an insignificant moment? Why did it jump out at me? It certainly shows where I grew up in this organization. Frankly, because to me, it's not insignificant at all. This is a slow drip way of softening all things disfellowshipping, or what they now call removal from the congregation. In the past 10 years, including the Australian Royal Commission and losing their annual $1 million check from the government of Norway, their shunning policy and all the details surrounding it have really been in the spotlight. If you haven't heard, they tried to present the Norwegian government with a revised version of shunning in recent weeks, only to have the officials say, nice try, you're not getting your money back. Nice try. Aside from the fact that this is shockingly unbelievable for anyone who's been a witness for any amount of time, imagine the many precious souls that have been destroyed by this doctrine. That didn't get them to change in any way. It didn't get the organization to change, not the people, not the trail of people that have been destroyed by their shunning doctrine, not taught in the Bible. See a past episode? That didn't get him to change. But losing a paycheck from a government did. And they were weak efforts to try to change the shunning policy. We've talked about it. If you're a Jehovah's Witness, and I read to you two references 16 years apart, when did Jesus change his mind about clapping? At one point, it was terrible. 16 years later, if it's spontaneous, that's just wonderful. And Gage is here doing it. How do you feel if you're a Jehovah's Witness about any of this? Is there somebody in your life that you're currently missing? It's really something what the passage of time does to us as human beings, and how we tend to ignore or dismiss the fact that this used to be a devastatingly awkward and cruel doctrine that they're trying to soften so that they can get money. Unbelievable. But governing body King Gage Flegel continues by mentioning their new Jesus video. You remember that one? It was a big deal this year. Their worldwide Bible study campaign. These are all highlights in his mind. And then, as mentioned during the original review, he launches into beard jokes. I'm not going there again. There's beard butter, there's toast jokes, then dress and grooming adjustments. He hits on those. All of what he considers spiritual highlights from the year. Feel free to listen to my original episode on this meeting from October. I'm trying not to repeat the obvious jokes here. However, it's worth once again mentioning that with all of mankind hanging in the balance and genocide imminent for every living creature on this planet, women, children, and anyone else, not a Jehovah's Witness, just on the horizon, it could drop any second now. The governing body considers giving grown adults permission to grow hair on certain parts of their body what he calls a spiritual highlight. And did I mention this is all food at the proper time? I wonder how long Jesus and those in heaven deliberated giving adults permission to grow the hair he created them with. I have to bring it up again because the absurdity knows no bounds. You would think this would wake up a Jehovah's Witness teetering on the fence. It continues to blow my mind. You might remember, He continues during the annual meeting, and I covered it, by mentioning the new Patterson Visitor Center, where grown adults dress up like first century Jews and pretend to make wine and shovel sheep shit and stuff, all with donated money. It's the new Disneyland for Jehovah's Witnesses. You can see a past episode on the absurdity of it all, but something I didn't cover then was King Flegel, a name I continue to believe should be adopted into a Shrek movie. Who do I talk to? He wants Jehovah's Witnesses to consider all the amazing things that have happened on October 5th throughout theocratic history. I might have missed this on the first go around. I thought, well, okay, October 5th? He starts with Mene Tekel Parson on October 5th, 539 BCE, allegedly. Don't worry, I've done enough with the Old Testament as of late, but a big hand appears and writes on the wall and stuff. He then brings Jehovah's Witnesses to October 5th, 1924, to highlight a printed resolution witnesses were handing out called Ecclesiastics Indicted, where Jesus directed them to take shots at the clergy in 1924, calling them partners of Satan and blaming them for all the world's wrongs. They're the bad guys. Brother Flegel gets all fired up and he rips them for not preaching God's kingdom and telling them they pledge their allegiance to the devil. He reads from the tract claiming that other religions are dishonest and have abandoned the truth. Your standard fare, if you're a Jehovah's Witness, it's almost the canned introduction for every public talk. But here I am again, and anyone sitting in that audience can take a look at the date he wants us to focus on, the famous October 5th, 1924, and easily remembers this was 4 years after this same organization, ripping all the others, was handing out a book titled Millions Now Living Will Never Die. I mean, Millions Now Living Will Never Die. That was the book on October 5th, 1924, that was standard fare for Jehovah's Witnesses. And it's funny, Gage doesn't mention this. He just doesn't mention it. And I'm guessing he just forgot. Because when you're reviewing how bad every other religion is from October 5th, 1924, in your neat tract that you're reading to us, it seems to slip your mind what you were doing. Judge Joe Rutherford, you remember him, emphasized this teaching in 1921 in the Harp of God book, which carried on the cover the inscription, quote, proof conclusive that millions now living will never die, end quote. Gage doesn't mention this about his October 5th reference. In 1924, the children's book, The Way to Paradise, published by the Watchtower Society, made a number of crazy predictions for 1925 and life in the new system. Go check that book out, I might add. It's really a lot of fun. The governing body in this annual meeting is here considering all the famous and wonderful things that happened on October 5th dates throughout their history, frankly, and Gage doesn't seem to mention any of this. He doesn't seem to mention what they, as a religion, were telling people on October 5th, 1924. But allow me to share in their own words. From the Proclaimer's book, you remember the big green Jehovah's Witness history volume that's, I believe, mothballed, not sure. It's now missing in most places, I do know that. It had this to say, quote, what an exciting message they proclaimed. Millions now living will never die. Brother Rutherford had given a discourse on this subject in 1918. It was also the title of a 128-page booklet published in 1920. From 1920 through 1925, I think that covers October 5th, 1924, Gage. That same subject was featured again and again around the world in public meetings in all areas where speakers were available and in upwards of 30 languages, end quote. Gage, I'm not sure all this talk about the kings who came before you and now watch on in heaven is a really good idea at this annual meeting. I don't think you should be looking at all the October 5ths of your history. Why are you sharing this? Where is this going? Again, 11 of these guys in a room coming up with the agenda for the annual meeting, and not one of them speaks up and says, hey guys, we might want to stay away from October 5th, 1924. I know you want to read this tract and it makes us sound really tough for all the other religions, but I don't know, did you take a look at what we were teaching as a religion? Not one. And it's stuff like this that leads me to believe they're trolling Jehovah's Witnesses at this point. They really, look, it's insulting, but the fact is they just don't think they're very smart. They know for a fact they're lazy. They're not going to go back and look at this stuff. They want to sound like tough guys on October 5th, 1924, false religion's so bad, and then just completely and dishonestly commit the sin of omission by not telling us what they were teaching, that millions of people would never die. I hate to tell Gage and his 10 friends, but this little diatribe against all of the religions makes you sound tough. Nothing your Judge Joe said came true. You think you're tough, but the guy leading you that came before you that's now in heaven, apparently feeding you this information now along with Jesus, none of it came true. Why would this tough guy act like this tract is really cool or of any interest to read at the 2024 annual meeting when they were teaching insanity themselves? By the way, Gage, all the people who were handing out this tract on October 5th, 1924, ecclesiastics indicted, well, they're dead, Gage. They're gone. But I love the proof conclusive tagline on the cover of Millions Now Living Will Never Die. Proof conclusive. It's on print, in print. You can see it. Oh, and if that wasn't enough, this organization was also saying this on October 5th, 1924. From the book itself, Millions Now Living Will Never Die, on page 88, Jehovah's Witnesses were telling the world this when they weren't bashing other religions. Quote, what then should we expect to take place? The chief thing to be restored is the human race to life. And since other scriptures definitely fix the fact that there will be a resurrection of Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and other faithful ones of old, and that these will have the first favor, we may expect 1925 to witness the return of these faithful men of Israel from the condition of death, being resurrected and fully restored to perfect humanity and made the visible, legal representatives of the new order of things on earth. End quote. Millions Now Living Will Never Die, page 88. Also part of their printed literature on October 5th, 1924. Any thoughts on this one, Gage? Your tract telling every other religion how bad they are is really neato and stuff. It's neat. But what about this? Forget it. I'm not even interested in doing deeper dive on this because I've done it so many times before. But since he says this, there's proof conclusive on the cover that the men of old will return to this earth and have authority in a perfect human race in 1925. You guessed it. Does anyone know where I can find my guy Noah? It seems he reappeared in San Diego, California at Beth Sarim in 1925. Can anyone confirm? This is a Jehovah's Witness teaching from a book they still point at during a time period when they were teaching this to people. This publication from the Faithful and Discreet Slave says proof conclusive on the cover. So I'm sure that Noah is wandering around somewhere. Is he still in San Diego? I haven't seen any perfect people either. And what's his title? I hope someone told him not to chase the neighbor's cats and try to catch them. Has anybody shown him the results of his handiwork by taking him to the San Diego Zoo? Thank you, Noah. We wouldn't have zoos today. Wow. I hope he isn't having a panic attack every time it rains. That probably sends him sideways. It's raining. He starts to panic. Get the animals. This is the kind of stuff that the same guys who came before Gage Flegel, the host of this 2024 annual meeting, were teaching the world on October 5th. 2024. It is amazing that these guys continue to point at their history. He left out a few additional details, but thanks for reviewing this tract I'd never heard of, Ecclesiastics Indicted. Okay. He mentions a few other spiritual milestones as he opens this meeting, all based on real estate projects. What a shock, that were also announced on October 5th in the past. He drones on about October 5th, 2014, and what he calls, quote, the first epic episode of Become Jehovah's Friend, an overt propaganda cartoon series, a series of cartoons meant to capture the minds of children. He then shows a trailer to the latest version, a cartoon that shamelessly tells children they are going to be reunited with dead loved ones any day now by means of a resurrection. It seemingly, in this cartoon, it's about a little girl and her grandmother comes back and there's music and people get goosebumps and they're all crying and the crowd there at the annual meeting are clapping. A kid's cartoon teaching them this. And it's odd because this cartoon, if you haven't seen it, it skips these same children, the same little girl, watching on as other kids her age are killed by the same guys hosting this annual meeting, and takes them right into paradise. It skips all the blood and mayhem and seeing little Tommy thrown from his bike as a fireball from David's plane hits his face. No, they fast forward where the young girl in the video is reunited with her grandmother. I've harped on this crap many, many times. It never gets old, because it's truly disgusting. And he is proud of it. It gets a child's mind committed to a publishing real estate company very early on in their life. Those are some of the top of the line highlights as Gage drones on. You might remember that this meeting also featured a talk by King Priest Jeffrey Winder. He's the other new guy, semi-new now, encouraging young Jehovah's Witnesses to volunteer for full-time service to the organization. He addresses the parents, telling them they'll miss their kids. He knows that he wants to, he's validating them. You're going to miss your kids because they're going to come work for us. He says, quote, don't hold them back or insist that they stay home with you for fear of missing them. You may be depriving them of the most fulfilling life, end quote. I might add, if I haven't said it enough, in service to him and his 10 best friends in upstate New York. I listened to this talk and their strong desire to get young people, imploring them to come to Bethel, to live what he calls the most fulfilling life. And I couldn't help but think that King Winder doesn't seem to mention any of the past, no famous October 5ths like Gage here. He doesn't seem to mention the massive Bethel layoffs during the late 1990s, nor that layoff with the deadline being February 1st, 2016, when lots and lots of Bethelites were sent home, when Jesus suddenly decided to downsize all of his Bethel families. And I tell you, if you don't remember this, reports are that the Bethel family was reduced by upwards of 25%. Which means thousands of Bethelites who had spent their entire lives in service to this organization, as Jeffrey says, the most fulfilling life ever, were kicked to the curb, sent back to the world with no education, no retirement, no health insurance, nothing. And many of those people were in their 50s and 60s and had spent their entire lives at Bethel. What was it he just said again in this annual meeting? Quote, you may be depriving your children of the most fulfilling life, end quote. Really, Jeff? Can we get an interview with some of those you kicked out of the temple in the past because Jesus suddenly needed to downsize? Even as he, in this last year, set up 3 new asset management companies in Ireland. What, Jeff, this isn't coalescing, man. Will you mention those companies in this talk, by the way? You're here in a recruitment talk trying to pull young people to Bethel. Are you going to mention that Jesus set up 3 new asset management companies? It's a highlight of 2024. No? Yeah, I didn't think so. But Jehovah's Witness parents watching are being encouraged to sacrifice their children at the altar of the governing body. And let's be frank, this kind of stuff isn't working like it used to in this organization. The fact that they have to give a recruitment talk at the annual meeting, pretty clear that they're struggling. But in an effort to convince parents and their children to serve them the most fulfilling life ever, he does what they always do. He pulls that ancient book, the Bible, out, and he uses it as his basis and points to an ancient character who lived in an agricultural society and was born into their heritage. They didn't have to do much. He takes the audience to the story of the prophet Samuel and his mother, Hannah. He, of course, skims over the fact that Hannah, she was one of 2 of Elkanah's wives. No mention of that. No mention. Wait, guys can have multiple wives? That's pretty neat. Hannah's someone to look up to, according to Jeff. Just a silly detail that she was, one of several wives, or that she was barren. She couldn't have babies, while the other woman, the other wife, was having babies, and as the Bible tells us, was trash-talking Hannah because she couldn't get pregnant. Jeff here uses this account because he wants Jehovah's Witnesses to focus on one small detail: her giving birth to Samuel eventually, and giving Samuel up for temple service. I couldn't help but think how appropriate this was. Thanks, Jeff. You see, I know that story. I know the story of Samuel and Anna. And there is a detail that fits in really well with Jehovah's Witnesses. See if you can pick this out. At 1 Samuel chapter 1 and verse 11 of the New World Translation, same account Jeff wants to point out, it says this, quote, and she made this vow. O Jehovah of armies, if you look upon the affliction of your servant and remember me, and you do not forget your servant, and give to your servant a male child, I will give him to Jehovah all the days of his life, and no razor will touch his head, and also not his chin until 2024. No, I added that, end quote. Did you catch it? Never mind that this was a cultural need for land inheritance in an agricultural society or the continuation of the family name by men. Hannah didn't just want any baby. No baby girls needed. She wanted a male child. Jeff doesn't focus in on this one very much when relating this story. He doesn't hone in, or does he? His talk includes the following comments, quote, our current and future needs require more young brothers for expanded theocratic service. Why? Proverbs 20:29 says, the glory of young men is their strength. There is a regular need for your help to handle important assignments. End quote. I guess this is a fantastic story for Jeff to relate. It's all about the guys. Just like Hannah, men are held in high regard inside an organization that continues to point to a patriarchal society featured in an ancient dusty book that has gone more revisions through the centuries than we can count. But he continues in his talk, quote, Some of you, especially you sisters, may have noticed that our comments were more weighted toward the young brothers to apply. And the reason for that is we need those brothers to grow and direct the work as they receive training. End quote. I'm not going to go on some sexist rant and talk about misogyny and all that stuff. The Bible is well documented. But I do think that this is all worth noting. He points to Hannah and Samuel. Hannah only wants a male child, obvious reasons in their society, but he applies it now to Bethel and volunteering to work for him and his 10 friends. We really want the fellas. Women are subservient inside this organization. It permeates the culture at every level, and they know it. Their wives know it. It's exactly why he makes this comment, and exactly why he throws in a little disclaimer in his talk in the next sentence. He goes on to say, quote, "But we would be amiss if we didn't acknowledge the hard work and self-sacrifice of the young sisters in the organization. The fact is, you're doing it. You are there. You are with us at Bethel. You are fully involved in theocratic construction around the world. Many of you courageously accept foreign assignments, and we truly love you for your example and your self-sacrifice." End quote. And if you are a woman or a sister in that audience and really paying attention along with life experience and observation, Jeff just threw you a bone. Here's a bone. You'll note that at no point does he encourage sisters to come get training, to apply for Bethel, to come help serve him and his friends. Perhaps they can run a construction project, or they could be a head engineer, or maybe they're a gifted architect. They could certainly be an elder in the congregation, right? No, because Jesus needs those pros in this time of the end, and he needs them to be guys, right? I found myself laughing at this half-ass attempt to placate the majority of Jehovah's Witnesses. That's right, I said it. The vast majority of Jehovah's Witnesses are women, and they get all the crap jobs. They knew their recruitment speech to the young guys here at the annual meeting was going to leave many of the sisters feeling a little cold. They don't really want them at Bethel. Yeah, well, let's scratch that. If you've been, you know, unless they can fold laundry, or they can make food, or they're really gifted at cleaning toilets. Oh, and did I mention, and this is a fact, correct me if I'm wrong, former Bethelites, in most cases, they want them to be wives of the men they've recruited to the important jobs. I had to laugh at his talk. You could tell it was awkward for him. He simply says, quote, "You're there with us. You're doing it." What exactly is the it, Jeffrey? What are they doing? Cleaning toilets, folding laundry. The training a woman can receive. What training? What training can a woman receive? They show the audience several times during this talk, it might be edited for all I know at this point, that women just aren't the most desirable catch when applying for Bethel. Women have accepted their ceiling in this organization. Their ceiling, what they can aspire to is standing in front of one of their book carts for several hours each week and, cleaning the Kingdom Hall. You're doing it. You're there with us, says Jeff. And I bring this out because I just find it all incredibly insulting and demeaning to women. They don't try to hide it much. They just kind of throw them a bone. So again, if you're paying attention to this particular part in his talk, there's no admonition for the sisters to go to Bethel and be trained, just the guys, just the boys. And like Hannah, she didn't pray to Jehovah for a healthy baby. No, she prayed for a boy baby. Some things never change. And so I can see why Jeffrey Winder pulls this out in his annual meeting talk. He goes on to encourage circuit overseers and elders and older Bethelites and low-key ask them to train the younger men. And I got the feeling he really wants the old folks to, yeah, if you wouldn't mind stepping aside, we'd like that. Just my opinion. Watch it for yourself. But there's a lot of emphasis on the older ones throughout this entire meeting, training younger ones. And I find that interesting. I definitely got a vibe in several of the talks that the older one's responsibility at this point isn't to prepare for a life in khakis and fruit bowls. It's to train the next generation. You might be wondering at this point what the requirements are to give your life in free labor to this real estate organization. Well, here it is. From the Good Works That Are Not Forgotten article from Our Christian Life and Ministry, the weekly meeting workbook in 2019 for Jehovah's Witnesses, there's a box at the end of the article. You can see this online, by the way. I did. That reads like this: qualifications for Bethel service. Deep love for Jehovah and his organization. High moral standards and a clean conscience before Jehovah. Dress and grooming befitting a Christian minister. Choice of entertainment appropriate for a Christian. Normally between 19 and 35 years of age. Oddly specific, would you agree? That changes, by the way, in a moment. Good mental, emotional, and physical health. I found that one very interesting. They're not interested in people who suffer from depression or are apparently over the age of 35. The ability to read, write, and speak well, the principal language of the branch. Willingness to stay for at least 1 year. Those are the requirements for serving these guys, no matter where you may be in the world. But it's during this talk at the 2024 annual meeting that they make an adjustment, changing the age for young men to apply to Bethel and come serve them from 19 to 18 years old. Wow, what a change, Brother Winder. You gave them a year. Is this throwing them a bone? I have to tell you, I thought long and hard about this. What the hell does it matter? 12 months? Oh, it matters, in my opinion. I think there's a strategy behind this change. I personally believe that at this point, based on what's going on in their culture and on the world landscape, that they do not want young Jehovah's Witness men having a full year following high school to figure out it's all a scam and bypass serving them for nothing. I think they've literally looked at the difference between 18 years old and 19 years old, and they are closing the gap. They want to get them from mom and dad's house immediately into their house with a full year to contemplate it all after you graduate high school from 18 to 19, maybe getting a job or some other distraction. They risk losing out on lots of free talent and labor. This organization captures children as early as possible, with many Jehovah's Witnesses reading to babies in the womb. They try to get them real early. Most are born into it. They make their first Kingdom Hall visit a week after being born, and then they spend their entire childhood being indoctrinated, trained to see this as a privilege, serving these guys. So it is my opinion, and I found this interesting as I re-listened to this, one of the leftovers from the annual meeting that jumped out at me. Why give any of these men a year out of high school to figure it all out? I believe they want to grab them before they leave home. I think they're closing the gap. And 12 months between the end of high school and being able to apply at 19 is a dangerous no man's land for the governing body. Am I reading too much into this? I don't think so. My take. The next talk, with some leftover highlights that jumped out at me, features the freshly bearded Mark Sanderson. He's one of my favorites, giving us the talk, Opportunities to Glorify Jehovah in the Field. He too, in my opinion, after listening to this, must have got really good grades in the theocratic school back in the day when it comes to his introductions, because he starts this talk at the meeting by saying, quote, "It was 140 years ago in 1884 when Zion's Watchtower Tract Society was legally incorporated," end quote. And for me, granted I have cognitive biases, I'm free of it all, from the beginning, the irony continues. First, why does Jesus need a corporation? Second, why are you pointing this out? Where was Jesus' corporation in the Gospels, by the way? But even worse, here we go again, proudly reminding the audience that this organization has been around for parts of 3 centuries now. And at least from where I sit, I'm not sure it's a good idea to constantly be reminding people that you have predicted the end of the world and have a 100% failure rate on every single last days prophecy you and the guys that came before you have ever published. Why are you pointing back 140 years to 1884 and the long trail of failure? But here is Mark Sanderson doing it again at the annual meeting. I wanted to interrupt Mark at this point and remind him what this organization was teaching people during this time period he's so proud of. I wonder if he's even aware at this point. How about the one that immediately jumped to my mind as his introduction was, it was 140 years ago in 1884 when Zion's Watchtower Tract Society was legally incorporated. Mark, do you know what was being said during that time period? From Zion's Watchtower, September 15th, 1895, the quote of all quotes to blow this annual meeting away, quote, "Beware of organization. It is wholly unnecessary. The Bible rules will be the only rules you will need. Do not seek to bind others' consciences and do not permit others to bind yours." End quote. He loves the year 1884. During this time period, 1895, that's embarrassing, Mark. This is embarrassing, and it's telling. You're here at the annual meeting with your fresh beard, pointing to the 140-year history of this organization. I don't think you should. And you're the first guy now, I should say the first guy, now, as we are to believe, according to Jehovah's Witness doctrine, listening in on this meeting from heaven, was himself telling people that organization is wholly unnecessary. And he was warning people to not come under any form of organization, to not pay attention to you. But Mark, please go ahead at the annual meeting. You're very captivating, I might add. And I'm here trying to figure out if I should be obeying King Chuck Taze Russell in heaven or King Mark Sanderson. You've created some confusion for me. Which of you kings is telling the truth? Which one? Your talk starts by saying 1884, our organization was legally incorporated. During that same time period in 1895, the first guy Jesus chose said, don't ever get involved with an organization, much less a corporation. It's absolutely insane. And it's funny, I'm once again remembering a verse from a book that Mark claims was written for him and his 10 best friends. Remember this one, Mark? 1 Corinthians chapter 5 and verse 6 of the New World Translation tells us, quote, "Your boasting is not good." Do you not know that a little leaven ferments the whole batch of dough? End quote. I'm going to try to ignore here that the Mark Sanderson is in fact, He's boasting, folks. But what am I supposed to do with the first earthly king, Charles Taze Russell's comment that you, Mark Sanderson, and your 10 friends have never been necessary? How do I put that together in my head if I'm a Jehovah's Witness? It's incredible, making this one of the top leftovers from the annual meeting for me. His talk goes on to be a standard begging people to be missionaries talk that we've all heard a million times as a witness. The difference in 2024 is that we're treated to actual faces and names of missionaries and a montage video telling us how awesome their lives are in distant lands. Mark goes on to tell people to get into full-time service for 2 years, then go to their school for kingdom evangelizers. And you could, the word is could, receive an assignment in your current country to gain valuable experience. Then maybe you'll get an assignment overseas. You see, if you haven't gained enough valuable experience of what it means to stand in front of a book cart in your hometown, watching people walk by for hours, you need a little bit more time. It's some more training. So they want to train people. It's very intense. Put down the iPhone and the Starbucks coffee and pay very special attention to people walking by and ignoring you in your hometown for 2 years. Then come to Mark's nifty school. That's a lot like every meeting you've ever attended in a Kingdom Hall. Then they send you back to your hometown. Then maybe we'll let you go to a third world country, navigate a foreign language, and figure out what to do about the lack of clean water. But you'll be handing out our books and magazines. Isn't this the best life ever? It's very fulfilling, according to Jeffrey Winder. So his talk is basically this, another recruitment talk, much like Winder's. Come be missionaries. Jeff says, come be a Bethelite. Mark Sanderson continues at the annual meeting, quote, this continues to amaze me, quote, we are pleased to announce today that the governing body has decided that young brothers and sisters 21 years of age or older may now apply to attend SKE. Isn't that exciting and wonderful? End quote. And you have to see it to see how excited he gets. He gets really fired up, and he is really, really awful, folks. It's just awful. It's important for non-Jehovah's Witnesses to know that these young people don't get paid to do this, but he's recruiting them to go to his school, then get sent back to where they came from, then spend a couple years there, then we'll send you to some country you didn't choose. Then you got to figure it out. They still have to figure out a way to survive at times in unfamiliar lands once they get there. And this organization has been leaning into this free labor model from the beginning. I personally have known people that were missionaries. They don't tell such romantic stories. They weren't part of the video montage of missionaries telling us how wonderful it all was, by the way. From physical to mental health problems to no money, and would you believe it, missionaries get little to no support from the governing body. They just point at the Holy Book and convince them that they represent God's only true organization in a glorified, dignified role in some other land. Or maybe right back at the street corner you've been doing this on since you were a kid. But we want you to do it. And I think it's very important to emphasize that these guys do not support missionaries, despite this recruitment talk, very well at all. And this is an organization that, according to one European documentary, I cannot corroborate this, is worth $52 billion. I'll tell you this much. According to the 2022 service report on their website, they claim the following, quote, during the 2022 service year, Jehovah's Witnesses spent $242 million in caring for special pioneers, missionaries, and circuit overseers in their field service assignments, end quote. What this means is beyond me, folks. I don't know anyone and didn't know anyone when I was a witness that was getting $242 million worth of special care from the governing body. I'm very curious how they measure this. The missionaries I knew for years, the ones he's trying to recruit at the annual meeting, they were all completely self-funded. They were funding all of it for themselves. They'd saved up money. They went to another country. So I am fully convinced that these quotes, this talk itself, is nothing more than a play on words. If they sent them $5 once 6 months ago, they want to say that they're supporting them. Another recruitment talk. And much like Jeff Winder's talk, Mark Sanderson in this one implores Jehovah's Witnesses once again, the older Jehovah's Witnesses, to train younger ones. And it's clear they know that we're all going to be here on earth a while. It's very clear. They're begging the older people to train younger people in these talks. And I couldn't help but wonder, did anyone in the audience linger on these reminders to old people? Why are we still here? Why do older ones need to train younger generations? It's all very assumptive in nature. It's in a very assumptive talk, like all of them. The people just clap. Everybody just claps along. But in one of the most appalling things I've ever seen a governing body member do, I don't know why this hit me the way it did. Marky Mark makes a joke that, in my opinion, lacks self-awareness, and I don't know any other way to explain it. It's just yucky. I just thought it was yucky. I don't know any other word to use. In this talk, in his recruitment to kingdom preachers, he relates an experience of an old Jehovah's Witness who's likely dead at the time of his talk that took him as a boy to his first annual meeting. He then says, quote, "I was so excited, I thought I had died and gone to heaven," end quote. Then he awkwardly pauses, he kind of giggles, he smirks at the camera. The audience, it took him a second to get his little joke. They start laughing, mostly because he does. Seriously, this really struck me as kind of sick. He apparently wants to remind the audience with his little joke that he himself is going to heaven. Get it? He. And he thinks he's being really cute. He thinks he's funny. It's weird because the audience, it takes him a minute. I knew what he was doing immediately. And I don't know why this hit me so hard. I just thought it's just kind of sick. It's weird. And this guy's ego is unbelievable. It's unbelievable. Imagine making a joke about going to heaven, because that's where I'm going. This guy sits around thinking about when he gets to go to heaven. This is just one of those moments when it hits me how truly bizarre this religion is. A religion that was part of my life for 40 years. It's so bizarre. Does he want us to pat him on the back at this point in the talk? Does he long for the days when he's invisible? Just a reminder, folks, I'm going to heaven. Isn't that funny? Is Jesus laughing and clapping in heaven as he gave this talk and this joke? It just really struck me. It lasts only a couple seconds. It struck me as weird. It's just weird. But isn't it something how everything in these talks now begins with the phrase, "the governing body has decided"? This is a theme throughout this annual meeting. The attention is on them, their decisions, all the adjustments of the past year, the invitations, the begging and recruiting. And I found myself in, God, if this doesn't speak to our spiritual training in this organization, I found myself wondering what the Apostle Peter was thinking as he sat up there in heaven during this 2024 annual meeting, next to Jehovah and Jesus. What was he thinking? Because he was the apostle that said this at 1 Peter chapter 4 and verse 11 of the New World Translation, quote, "If anyone speaks, let him do so as speaking pronouncements from the governing body, from God." If anyone ministers, let him do so as depending on the strength that God supplies, so that in all things God may be glorified through Jesus Christ. The glory and the might are his forever and ever. Amen. If anyone speaks, it should be about God. Um, Mark missed this one. Maybe him and Peter can hash it out when he gets up to heaven. Never mind. Jehovah's Witnesses are treated to the phrase, the governing body has decided. So what Peter said here about when anyone speaks, it should be for Jehovah, it isn't particularly important because the governing body decided it isn't. Oh, man. The final talk and my final leftover from this annual meeting for 2024 comes to us and is hosted by King Jeffrey Jackson, who is clearly, in my opinion, with this talk, trying to do damage control. He highlights how a Jehovah's Witness should view all the recent changes, nothing like being told how to feel. I'm not going to cover all the doctrinal changes he reminds the audience of. He reaches back to the 2021 annual meeting at one point. See past episodes, by the way, highlighting the changes to things like the Great Tribulation, the resurrected, people that died during the flood, and Sodom and Gomorrah, blah, blah, blah. He talks about all of them, which seems to be a theme in their talks this year. They want to review all the October 5ths. They want to talk about 140 years ago. Jeffrey Jackson wants to show you how they've grown and all these changes they've made. But at one point in this talk, he says, quote, "Isn't it true," leading question, by the way, "that gradually Jehovah has prepared us? And when we look back on it, we see how logical this training has been to refine our understanding," end quote. And folks, this right here is why this silly podcast host needs a few days away from it all to round out this year. The gaslighting is not only embarrassing, but it's just exhausting. Do you ever get exhausted? I notice even in the numbers that listen to this podcast, some are more popular than others. I get it. Because I think we get tired. Tired of being gaslit, tired of the lying, tired of reviewing just a bunch of BS. But Jeffrey says it's also logical. King Jackson, he, famous for lying on the stand in the Australian Royal Commission, wants us to believe that overlapping generations or teaching people false things for decades and then changing it, or predicting the end of the world and failing 100% of the time, or asking us to obey him and his 10 best friends, even when it makes no sense, it's in print, that it's all very logical. And from Jehovah, he's been training us, you know. King Jeff goes on to warn people about the sudden changes that are coming. And for well over 140 years now, he makes fun of Jehovah's Witnesses at one point in this talk that have watched the memorial partaker numbers from the yearbook, which was a big deal for witnesses, those of us that remember, how they've been going down for decades. Something that him and his guys encouraged. It was by far the page everyone turned to in the service report, every Watchtower study, and with the yearbook. How many less people do we have? We're getting closer to paradise. And he makes fun of the people that did that. And he gets to the point of really what this whole talk's about. There are two new governing body guys, and they're young. And the people in that audience and Jehovah's Witnesses have a ton of questions. He gaslights a crowd old enough to know what they've been telling Jehovah's Witnesses for decades. I'm not going to spend any more time dissecting his lies. He is one good liar, this one. He's blatant. The Watchtower Library, if you're a witness on the fence listening bravely, it contains all of it, showing how truly stupid these men are. He says this stuff making fun of them. He goes on for several minutes. Oh, we all get out the yearbook and look at the numbers going down. Yeah, everyone's going to be dead and we'll go to heaven. He makes fun of it, and it's all in print. It's clear they don't want the old-timer J-dubs bitching about guys in their 40s and their 50s becoming kings and members of the governing body. He knows it's happening. He goes on a harebrained new understanding of what happens during the Great Tribulation. Not going to go there. It deserves its own episode. Stay tuned. But the entire message from King Jeffrey Jackson in this talk, part 1, found on the website, is to not be complacent. Changes will be sudden. And I only have one thing to say. The rebranding of this religion will continue. They're clearly laying the groundwork for lots of changes. And you should feel a certain way about it. You shouldn't question or believe that Jesus sat up there in heaven teaching Jehovah's Witnesses the wrong things he would change in 2024. He just rolls that way. That's just the way he rolls. People making life decisions, people dying, people giving up on everything they love, including people they love. Well, we had that one wrong. We're just going to change it down the road. It's okay. Isn't it amazing? According to Jeff, it's all very logical. And with that, I'm exhausted. And so concludes their edited version of the annual meeting part 1 for December 2024 that Jehovah's Witnesses have an opportunity to go watch and listen to. Brother Van Whelm reappears and tells us part 2 will be covered in the January broadcast. It was really my goal here to cover a few things that I didn't cover in my October episode, now that it has been released for all Jehovah's Witnesses to watch. A couple of final points. 1, most Jehovah's Witnesses won't watch this. It's really ironic. They'll hear about all these changes and these talks and these throwaway weird comments. They'll hear about it organically by word of mouth at a Kingdom Hall. They won't spend the time to go sit and watch this. For those that do watch this, particularly older ones, I believe this stuff is actually doing damage to this organization. Certainly in my generation, people I've talked to, people that have left, people that have called me after years of shunning to say I left too. This stuff's doing damage. It became very clear in this part 1 of the annual meeting that they're clearly mothballing older Jehovah's Witnesses. You see it in just their governing body appointments. It's an insult, even if they don't realize it, and I think they do. Decades of loyalty from some of these people to an organization that isn't going anywhere, much less a really, really soon future date where you can eat a garden burger on the back of your pet giraffe. That's not going to happen. And they know it. It continues to remind me how blatant they've become with the lies and the self-indulgence. It's all right there. I covered 3 talks on the host. Each annual meeting of this organization highlights changes, sometimes several changes. And they just want us to believe that's how God and his son roll. And I can't help but remember this from Malachi 3:6 of the New World Translation. Quote, "For I am Jehovah. I do not change." End quote. I want to thank you all for being here this week. As I mentioned, I'm going to take a little mental health break, enjoy some nature. And I really hope you do as well. I hope you'll rejoin me again for the kickoff to 2025. It's no small year. It's year 111 of the last days that never end. Until then, enjoy this time of year and be well.